Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back after the lunch. I hope you enjoyed it. We will now start with session 3, and it is my pleasure to invite Ambassador Ursula Plasnik, former Foreign Minister of Austria and current Ambassador of our country to France, to the stage, as well as the panelists for session 3.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm not first. Do we already take that? Go in order? Or? Hello. If you would like to, yeah.
Sehr gut. Dankeschön. Bitte. Dann werden wir, dann werden wir Sie dort hinsetzen. Sehr gut. Und da kommt die auch die Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this afternoon session, and thank you for your interest. This is really the probably most ambitious panel, if I may put it that way, because this panel is trying to bridge the gap between the global level and the local level. This is from the global village to the local village, to the villagers, to those who live in the village and who have to cope on the ground with the disastrous experience of conflict-related sexual violence and its impact. As one of the panelists this morning put it, this is linking the roots, the grassroots, to the tree tops and the other way. I am very glad to be able to present to you the panelists who are going to help us in this task. I would maybe foremost like to present Marianne Bauer, who comes from the Special Representative for Sexual Violence in Conflicts Office. Marianne Bauer will be the one who will give us a clearer indication of what was discussed yesterday at the session in the Security Council. I will also then, in the summary, probably try to familiarize you with the words of Secretary General, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on that issue. We do have, I would like to present the other panelists now. Ulrike Lunacek, European parliamentarian, member of the European Parliament, is an old-time partner, enemy, and friend in the meantime. We have had our quarrels when I was in government and she was an opposition party leader in the Austrian Parliament, so we tried to give each other a hard time, but we have always been united in the attempt to support women in the global village and wherever we work. She has a wonderful experience not only as the Vice President of the European Parliament, as a member of the Committee on Foreign Relations of the European Parliament, as the Kosovo rapporteur, which is one of her particular areas of expertise, but also as, and I hope I get it right, the co-president of the Intergroup on LGBT rights. So a wealth of and national parliamentarian, as I have mentioned before. I'm glad, Ulrike, that you could join us today. We then welcome, because we need male champions in this fight, there is no doubt about that, we welcome Mr. Michael Bimler, who is originally Swiss, if I have detected his accent right last night. He is a Development and Complementarity Officer at Justice Rapid Response. This is an intergovernmental institution that has made it its mission to manage the rapid deployment of criminal justice and related professionals for the investigation, analysis, and reporting on serious human rights violations. This is, in the larger sense, the matter of how to advance and promote accountability. And we have this morning discussed the issue of accountability. There is not going to be immunity any longer for those who use sexual violence against women systematically and who use it as a tool of war or as a tactic of terrorism. I would like to welcome also to my right, or from your point of view to the left, Ms. Cassandra Atlas. She's Assistant Director of Human Rights Advocacy of the organization MADRE. Her organization partners with grassroots women's groups facing war, disaster, and their consequences, and they train them to advocate for policies based on their rights locally, nationally, and globally. Thank you for being with us. I now come to someone who is with us from Syria, and I'm very grateful to Kaula Akel that she came to join us this afternoon on this podium. She represents the United Nations Population Fund with a specific center of activities in the Syrian context, also with regard to health, with support for women on the health side, on the physical and emotional consequences of gender-based violence, offering psychosocial assistance, medical treatments. She's really the woman who can bring to us the experience from the ground, both in managing under extremely difficult circumstances, support for the women concerned, and by reporting to us what her strategies, her recommendations for the future would be. Because this whole group should really be the first occasion to test the new strategy provided to us by the United Nations Special Representative on the issue. This is the first test discussion, if you want. We have not been able, for time reasons, and as teleportation does not physically work yet, we have not been able to have the special representative of the Secretary General, Hava Bandura, with us today, but Marianne will be her representative and speak on her behalf. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, and I would also like to thank the organizers of this conference and the esteemed speakers who we heard in the morning, who provided in so much detail the trends and patterns that we see on conflict-related sexual violence and the important role of grassroots women and civil society in addressing this problem. I also want to say that I'm a bit self-conscious of coming from the United Nations, from a United Nations office to a conference that is dedicated particularly to the role of grassroots women in fighting conflict-related sexual violence, or CRSV, as I will say it in short to save some time. But I think we all know that this is such a complex problem that we all need to work together on addressing it on. It can be nothing without the work of civil society implementers on the ground who have the reach and the outreach to work where sexual violence occurs. But I truly believe that it also needs this push from the United Nations, and that we can have a role in providing an enabling environment for civil society to play their important role through a political advocacy or through advocating for resources to be available for civil society organizations to amplify their vital role. So I fully support what you said, Madam Ambassador. We're here to present what we have, how we would see a possible response to conflict-related sexual violence, but we really want to hear from you what needs to be prioritized, what are we probably forgetting, possibly forgetting in this. I'm really interested in hearing that afterwards in a discussion, possibly. What we've heard in the morning is that we've seen a fundamental shift in the way that conflict-related sexual violence is being understood and being addressed. It is now understood as a complex phenomenon that cuts across every aspect of a survivor's life and livelihood, as we heard, for example, from Brenda in the morning. And it's such a complex phenomenon that needs an equally comprehensive and complex response that cuts across all different kinds of sectors. Development, human rights, security, public health, service provision. So what we have done as the UN in other situations, such as the DRC, is we have pioneered comprehensive strategies on sexual violence that married service provision with justice, with security. And we have done similar strategies in Côte d'Ivoire and in Liberia, for example. However, I think what we also heard in the morning is that we face even aggravating factors in the Middle East, such as mass migration, trafficking of women and persons. Perpetrators of sexual violence know no borders, right? So we also believe that a response, besides being cross-sectoral, it also needs to be regional. And I know we have heard, from our colleague from Syria before that the problems are different, but the phenomena are still the same in many ways. And ISIL is a perpetrator that cuts across Iraq and Syria, for example. So we believe that we all need to work together across agencies and on a regional basis. Yes. So how have we analyzed from our office how a possible response would look like? Hearing all the different problems, we could categorize that response into 7 pillars, and yeah, please bear with me. I'm happy to have other speakers to elaborate on some further points. The first pillar is that we need to mobilize political support, commitment, and resources. We need to have political support at all levels, at the national level, at the regional level, and at the sub-regional level, sub-national level. And for example, SOSG Bangura, who we have seen in the morning, she's in dialogue with state parties and, for example, such as the Syrian government, to get real concrete commitments to end violations. It's of course a difficult task, but we need such commitments. She has also, for example, agreed on a commitment with the League of Arab States on certain steps to be taken to prevent and address sexual violence. But it can't only be done at this level. It's vital that we have also civil societies and particularly women engaged in that, because women can make a real difference when it comes to changing behaviors and attitudes on the grounds that underpin oftentimes gender inequalities and the spread of violence. And women and civil society has a role to play when it comes to providing the support for victims and survivors of sexual violence to come back home, because it's not enough that that they are free. They need to come back to this supportive environment. The second pillar of the strategy is to ensure that the protection and empowerment of women is a central part of the strategies to prevent violent extremism, counterterrorism. Why is that? We've heard that ISIL and terrorist groups, they have really institutionalized sexual violence as a tactic of the terrorism, so it needs to be recognized as such. But it also helps the survivors. If survivors of sexual violence by terrorist groups are recognized as survivors of terrorist acts, that provides them with the status that allows them to access, for example, services or other provisions that are put in place for survivors of terrorism. It's important to have women's active participation in all of these discussions, of course, on counterterrorism and on preventing violent extremism. And it's also been recognized in the Secretary General's Action Plan that women's rights cannot be adversely affected through these actions. The third pillar of the strategy is to enhance early warning and risk mitigation and prevention. We need to support early warning mechanisms, particularly around refugee and IDP camps, to identify harmful practices early on. We need to provide support to communities in order to do so. it's also vital to work with religious leaders to develop a counter-narrative to this claim by terrorist groups that there is a religious basis for sexual violence. That is really a key focus also of the work of our office that we have started to engage in and that we will continue taking forward. Finally, also another important part of prevention is, as we heard in the morning, in some countries, children who are born out of rape and who are born to women who are unmarried are not able to be registered. And so we are facing the risk of, a stateless generation, which of course, they will be very vulnerable to additional violence than happening to them. So we're facing a cycle of perpetuating violence in that regard if we don't manage to change laws and able to provide a registration of these children. So first 3 pillars: mobilize commitment and resources, mainstream the protection and empowerment of women in counter-terrorism activities, and to enhance early warning, risk mitigation and prevention. The 4th pillar is to strengthen support to survivors of CRSV, and I'm particularly happy to have our colleague from UNFPA here who will talk in more detail about that. I just want to say as much that there are the worst challenges and obstacles in providing accessible services, of course, and in providing adequate services in terms of health services, shelters, justice services. So we really need a concerted commitment to increase the resources, for example, for livelihood support, poverty elevation, reintegration support, and also the provision of reparations. The 5th pillar is to deepen information, analysis, and documentation that I think we have heard from Ambassador Lansky-Tiefenthal in the morning, that we cannot, if we need to understand the problem thoroughly in order to decide on how to be able to address it. So we are working very closely with the UN country team to get such information, and also we have sent investigators to the region and are currently working on a detailed report on the phenomenon of conflict-related sexual violence in Syria and Iraq mainly. The 6th pillar is to ensure accountability through investigation and prosecution, as combating impunity is still a key aspect of deterrence. I know we have, for example, Michael Bimler from JRR and also Cassandra to talk more about how this documentation takes place. So I will leave it with this headline and go to the final pillar, pillar number 7, which is to have active women participation and peace and mediation processes. Because I think that was a very important point made by a Nobel Peace Laureate Jody Williams at the end, that we cannot make peace for women without women on the table. We need to, women know what they need and they need to be part of the peace negotiations. And also an important part of any ceasefire agreement is that conflict related with sexual violence needs to be considered as a breach of this ceasefire agreement. That in a nutshell are the 7 pillars, and I think I will leave it with that and look forward to the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Freundin nehmen oder wollen Sie jetzt dran? Geht sich das zeitlich? I'm just trying to check the time, and I think if you all agree, because Mrs. Lunacek will have to leave earlier, unfortunately, to catch her plane. So I would invite Kaula Akel probably to come in and respond directly to the proposals you have heard that are being the UN level strategy. Is that compatible with your impressions, with your needs, with the support you want to get, or do you have a totally different view?
I will take notes.
Thank you.
So, good evening, everybody. I'm very glad and honored. It's a pleasure and honor, actually, to be among this group. It's a responsibility that I hope that I can be up to represent the voice of Syrian women from like a humanitarian point of view, from a UN point of view. Actually, listening to other speakers will make me like think about, or will I was able to categorize what's happening in Syria or the situation of women in Syria in 4 aspects. First of all, yes, we had our share of social diseases, and it's quite substantial. Syria had its problem regarding gender-based violence, domestic violence, and we had all of our gender issues. I am a domestic violence survivor myself, and that was way before the crisis. So, well, having these issues in Syria reflected or surfaced in a very in the same way, yani, in a meaning that when you see the situation, when you see the problem, it shows like it's the same. Everywhere in Syria now, we have the same problems regarding conflict-related sexual violence. When you say early marriage or child marriage, when you say jihad al-nikah, when you say women being sold on markets, it's like almost identical everywhere. The dynamics that surfaced or that created this kind of problem is different, which make us like have to address these issues in a different ways. So we start our work in each area with an assessment. Yes, we are dealing with a child marriage in all areas, maybe inside Damascus, inside the capital, or inside siege areas or cluster-line areas under the oppositions. There is a child marriage, but the dynamic that created the child marriage is different in each area, which creates or which like make us deal with the problem in a different way. That's from one side. From the other side, I can assure you that when you like go to every area in Syria and listen to women, you see the same coping mechanism. They deal with all kinds of daily difficulties, female-headed households, they lose their life partners, but in the same time, they are so resilient in a way that you are surprised how they are surviving till now, how they can find the strength in them to keep on doing their daily thing. And that's something you can realize during when I do focus group discussion, when I do key informant interviews, I can hear almost the same terminology everywhere, that we are going to do it, I think I can manage this. So that's a whole load of problems that's been on the Syrian women's shoulders everywhere. Yani, for women in refugee camps, for women in IDP shelters, for women inside the community, you hear exactly the same word. In addition to our package of problems as a society, well, let's say that we are not supported by a legal framework. Yes, the Syrian law does not support survivors at all. The Syrian law did not understand or was not able to address, with all due respect, Brahim, I know you are a lawyer, but I'm quite frustrated with the Syrian law myself. So the Syrian law actually is not fair to survivors at all. It doesn't understand the needs of a survivor. We have laws in Syria that makes it okay for a girl to marry when she's very young. We have, Syrian law doesn't recognize marital rape. Syrian law doesn't recognize intimate partner violence. Syrian law now doesn't allow a woman to have an abortion, even if this pregnancy is due to a rape, even if this pregnancy is due to a rape from a family member. Abortion is against the law by all means. When a woman gives birth to this child is not registered because the law doesn't have a modality to register this child. So, summarizing all this, summarizing all the problems that surfaced in the Syrian community, well, I'm not exaggerating when I have to tell you that I had to have a meeting with the regional GBV advisor just to be able to find the terminology that is like describe what's happening. We came up with the terminology, we called it serial marriages, because women are getting married one marriage after another, without like having the break between marriages, and for several reasons. They are married even if they were not divorced from the ex-husband. They are forced to get married to older men. They are forced to get married to mujahideen. This guy disappears, so she has to get married to the next guy. And when she is pregnant, the law doesn't support her to have a father for her child. So all these package of problems, they end up in our service points as UNFPA. And not only UNFPA, but I'm going to talk about it from a UNFPA point of view. Yes, we receive these women in our service points. We try to make ourselves available. In order to avoid discrimination, what we do is that we have our services spread everywhere. In each service point for UNFPA, we have the 4 major services that each survivor would need. But based on having a reproductive health clinic as an entry point for a survivor. We depend on the fact that each and every woman would need a gynecologist at least once in her life. And that's for us a good entry point. All these services are like end up in or it's wrapped in a program that ends up with the empowerment of the survivors. So we aim to lead these women to be empowered, to be able to rebuild this life. So in every service point, we have RH clinic, we have legal services, counseling services, we have the psychosocial support services, and we have the empowerment program. These centers are spread all over Syria. We do that through partners. And we link each center with the community-based activities, and meaning that we have an outreach mobile teams that go to the community to address several issues. We are being very subtle about promoting for our services, while mentioning that we address only survivors or we address family problems. That's not the issue. We talk about health, we talk about empowering women, we are talking about the consequences Syrian women are suffering because of the crisis, and I'm using UN terminology here, regardless what we call what's happening. So we talk about it, and we have like a very close referral pathway in coordination with partners. So what I like to call it, we close the cycle of services. We cover the needs of the services in all areas, and we try not to let go of the survivor unless we make sure that she is really ready to go, to leave and start her life. Most of them, they come back as advocates, actually. They ask for a job. Why we are that successful? Because we never start a program in an area without having a needs assessment. We have focus group discussions, we sit with women, we try to understand what's happening in each area, what their actual needs, we try to understand how they see their problem, and we address the problem from that point of view. So we are, the fact that I'm saying we do this doesn't mean that we are meeting all the needs. No, because maybe it's not, I'm not exaggerating if I said every other woman in Syria is a Shahnaz. Shahnaz was courageous enough to step up and talk, but this is faced every day in our clinics. We see these cases. Now, to the other aspect of the service providing, service providers themselves. Service providers sometimes are either survivor, or they are a part of the conflict, or they are affected by the conflict themselves. And they are not well equipped with the training that will help them to provide these services efficiently. So when we do the trainings, we deal with the problem that our service providers are part of the conflicts, and sometimes they are survivors themselves. Actually, that can be turned into turning them into a leader of change in their communities, if they have enough faith in what they are doing. We were able to convert some of service providers to be able to be advocate for us. Actually, we have like the very successful story with the forensic doctor, who was like starting point with the survivor was suspicion, and now he's an advocate for human rights. And he repeats the same sentences we used as people like we work in this domain. So that's from at one level. So inside Syria, we are trying to work at the 4 levels of the programming when we address the problem. We try to work with partners, even with the partners that are not only the NGOs, we have international NGOs, we have government partners, that they are started to understand the downfall of the system in Syria. And at least they are willing to listen now. On the other hand, we have the, the coordination system in the UN. So we have the GBV sub-working group, which is part of the protection cluster in Syria. We have 22 members from the national community, the 22 NGO. These NGOs are working with us on services, on advocacy, on awareness raising. Still saying this is not enough. The problem we are facing is bigger than this. We need the support from the international community. We need the support from all people who work in this domain. At the level of the regional office now, we have the 2-year strategy of combating child marriage. Syria is a part of that. We are working on the advocacy. We have our CMR, Clinical Management for Rape, Adaptation for Protocol. We almost reached the point of the adaptation in Syria. We are only one workshop away of adapting the clinical management for rape within the Syrian context. We have our new guidelines for GBV programming and GBV mainstreaming. So things started to go in the right direction. When it comes to achievement, no. The achievements are so humbled when you compare it to the scope of the problem. The situation is so fluid that we start doing something, and when we are wrapping up the project, we are faced with a security situation that makes us lose everything we did, and we have to start all over again. Seeing people like all of you trying to support what's happening in this part of the world make us a bit optimistic, but in the same time, the proper understanding of what's happening on the ground. We are not totally helpless or hopeless. We have believers. We have people with a natural intelligence that help them to understand. We have activists. We have people who step up and work, and we walk the talk. But is that enough? Well, no, that is not enough. As UN, we have a lot of work. We do the comprehensive work that make us go slower, but it make us, and I'm using your words for this, but it make us work in more established way. So I hope that I was able to reflect what's happening inside Syria, and will be open for your questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla, for giving us this insight, not only on the very specific item or issue of conflict-related sexual violence, but on the broader society context as you experience it in your valuable work. I would now like to turn to Ulrike Lunacek, Vice President of the European Parliament. The European Parliament is an extremely powerful institution, although the Parliament itself doesn't think this is the case. But they are very powerful, in particular with regard to third country relations, because they have important delegations, they have a system of rapporteurs, they have really dominance over the bilateral agreements, because they are the ones who are in contact with not only the Commission services but also the European Parliament delegations with the respective countries. So they can have a lot of impact in dealing with the grassroots situation, in the way the funds are being used and channeled, whether women's organizations, grassroots organizations will benefit from that or not. And I know that from her very practical experience in the Balkan context, not only with the women in Kosovo, but the whole region, Ulrike Lunacek will have a lot of pertinent remarks and probably requests. I'm not the minister any longer, nor the president of the European Parliament, so I'm on the safe side. Please go ahead, Ulrike.
Oh, thank you very much, and first of all also thank the organizers for inviting me to be here, and allow me, before I answer the questions and get into the topic, I'd like to share two things that were important in my own life to make me also an activist for women's rights and a feminist. One was when I was still at university in Innsbruck, very conservative, traditional Austria, Catholic, end of 1970s, beginning of the 80s. We're there with a task force we wanted to create the first shelter for battered women and their children. And at that time, even in Austria, it was still an idea, well, that's private business. That's none of your affair to look into what's happening behind a family's walls. And well, it wasn't even a law in Austria yet that when you're raped by your husband, that would be a crime. That has changed. Yeah? So I have that background, and we managed at that time to do it. The second thing was, and I read the words of Rigoberta Menchú there, the world is not going to change unless we change ourselves. I had the great pleasure, I think 30 years ago, before Rigoberta Menchú became a Peace Nobel laureate, to do interpreting for her in Vienna at an event when she was there as an indigenous leader from Guatemala. And she was also at that time already somebody who talked about conflict-related sexual violence that happened in her own country, in Guatemala, with her people. So that is a background why I find it so important that this is a topic that is raised, that we have women empowered at all levels, that there is, as you have said, one of the first point, mobilize political commitment, support and resources, and also to have men as allies. Because without men changing their attitude towards women, it won't change. Yeah? As much as we women can change it, but as long as we don't have men who take up the issue, who speak out in public, in private and in public, against gender-based violence, at home and in the streets and in wars. Yeah? As long as that doesn't change, as long as men don't also give up jobs, yeah? Also in the military, yeah? Also in the security issue, at peace talks for women to take their place, we still have a long way to go. So that just as a starting thing. Thanks. And maybe, yes, from the European Parliament, and don't worry, I mean, we see the power we have. The problem is that structurally speaking at EU level, we're not a parliament that can make laws ourselves. We need to wait for the Commission to propose them. But at least we co-legislate together with the Council. And in international affairs, as you have said, yeah, we have a say over the budget of the European Union. We have a say where the money goes. We also look at it afterwards to see whether it really went to what was promised. And also we have regular contact with all the EU delegations, the EU embassies in all parts of the world, where every one of them has, for example, a human rights focal point. And where we also push them in order to look at the issue of how women are treated wherever. Because, I mean, in general, so many member states of the UN have signed all kinds of treaties and things. The problem is that they don't live up to it, what they have promised. So when it comes to strategies, I also find it important, and the points you have mentioned, I think they're all very, very good, and I think they really need to be done. What I'd like to put there as a starter as well is look at look at a level that's maybe a bit meta level, because what is it that happens when sexual violence or gender-based violence occurs, be it in conflicts or outside? It is a humiliating experience, and especially in wars, it is something where men use this violence as a war weapon against other men. Women's bodies are just a kind of object there. And so this really crime against human dignity, this humiliation that makes women's sort of experience so traumatic, And that takes usually a lifetime, not just get healed physically, but also mentally, psychologically, yeah, if that's possible. But there are ways to help. That is something I think that has to be at the sort of at a kind of introduction to such a strategy, and also the fact that I find so important, especially in times when we live waves of religious and nationalist fundamentalisms all over the world, also here in Europe, and from whatever religion. The fact that women in many of the traditional patriarchal religions are not seen as independent persons. Now, you had, I think, a debate about that, but the fact to in education, be it by family, be it by religious leaders, but also political leaders, to make sure that women learn, that we learn from girls' steps, from girlhood, that we have the right to have an independent life, an economically independent life, and that we learn to think independently and demand our rights for ourselves, not always having to refer to somebody, some male family member or somebody, whether we are allowed to do something, especially when we're adults then. These things, I think, are at the center when it should come to a strategy against sexual violence, against conflict-related sexual violence. Because without that, all these things are extremely important, yeah? And I agree with you that getting women at the table, empowering, ensuring protection, yeah? Making sure that women survivors are seen as survivors and not just something, well, that happened in the war, so what, yeah? So that I would like to start with. At the European Parliament, we've had, and I checked it before I came here, 3 resolutions in the last 6 years, since 2010, that referred to the topic we're talking about now. In 2010, 10 years after 1325. In 2012, one on women and war, in situations of war. And just recently, at Women's Day of 2016, one on female women and girls as refugees and in the asylum systems. And all of that tackle lots of things. You can find it in the internet. I'm not going to read them out to you, don't worry. But what I'd like to add here is my specific experience that the ambassador referred to in Kosovo and in the Balkans. In Kosovo, you know, the war is just 17 years ago. And there, the fact that war rape was also an instrument of war there as well, from both sides. And the Kosovo Women's Network and other female leaders in the country, also the president, Atifete Yayaga, who just had to resign after her first period just recently, they really made it a point to make sure that also, for example, in the Veterans Association and in the law, survivors and victims of the war rape are being recognized as such. And that was not an easy task, because it was also criticizing their own heroes. Yeah? And also that they should be recognized publicly. That has happened in the law they have done. It doesn't mean that everybody, that in all families that is okay now, because like war rape also is something where the honor of men is being violated. So respecting then that maybe from a man's point of view, your own wife had been raped by the enemy is not an easy task for men either. Yeah? But recognizing women that they had been raped. And now the task that still remains to be done is that they are going to be there's going to be financial indemnization for the task. You never can, with money it doesn't heal, but it helps to be recognized. Yeah? So that is things that are important to be done. As for the strategy, one thing I would like to ask you, Marianne, because you talked about the early warning mechanisms. And I remember I was in New York, I think it was 2002, when Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and Elizabeth Rein presented their assessment on the impact of armed conflict on women and women's role in peace building. It was called Women, War and Peace, where they looked at several issues where you can find out before an armed conflict starts, with talking to women, for example, where the arms are, yeah? Where are they in the buildings? Or who knows about where they are? Things like that, I found that really interesting, and I looked at it again now. So are you taking these kind of things? I mean, it's 14 years ago, but still, many things there are very relevant. So is it something you're also looking into in order to fill up the strategy now? I'll stop for now, otherwise I can go on for a long time, but I'll come back later.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of practical experience and recommendations that come from Ulrike Lunacek, and I totally agree with her. We should be open in addressing the delicate subject why sexual violence in conflict or as an act of terrorism is so attractive for the perpetrators. This is a very uneasy and very uncomfortable analysis we have to make here, because it means that those who perpetrate such crimes, and they are now legally qualified as war crimes, as crimes against humanity, as part of genocide by the international legal system. So this will, and this is the great hope in, this will end impunity. And I must say, I personally want to see Boko Haram and ISIL or Daesh brought to justice. I want to see them in front of the criminal court. What seems to make it so attractive, and this is not so easy to understand for women, is probably that here, if you demonstrate sexual dominance over the future of the enemy, both individually and collectively, and you also interfere from the outside in the regular generational cycle, if you want, of a community. This is what makes it, among other things, so difficult for the women who, or the girls really, who are victims. The Chibok girls, it really tears apart your heart. They are now expelled from their own original communities because they cannot, the community does not know how to reintegrate women who have been forced to bear the children of the enemy. So we should not shy away from talking about the origin and the reason. Why has this been, since the beginning of time, why since the beginning of time women's bodies have been battlefields? And unless we talk about this, unless we start changing mindsets, and unless we increase awareness, I think we're only doing half of the job and covering up, rather than exposing and changing what has to be changed. I would like to return now to those who need the immediate support, the immediate help, the immediate participation of larger communities. And I would, in this sense, address you, Cassandra. Maybe you can give us a view of what your organization, Madre, can do and does in order to help the women affected.
Good afternoon. I'd like to begin by thanking the conference organizers for the opportunity to be here and speak with you, and also to the organizers and panelists for making this very rich discussion possible. I'm going to highlight 3 areas where grassroots women are making key contributions to combating conflict-related sexual violence in the MENA region, as well as practical recommendations for policy and programmatic actions that can bolster support for their efforts, and which I think speak directly, Marianne, to the SRSG's MENA strategy. The first is grassroots women's strategies for prevention of CRSV. As we all know, grassroots women's organizations possess a keen awareness of the realities of women's experiences of discrimination and violence, including sexual violence, and they are best positioned to understand the specific context, religion, and culture of their communities and the nuances that emerge at these intersections. This understanding, coupled with the ability of grassroots groups to reach individuals in need where government and international relief officers have sparse access, is very key to providing effective protection to survivors and to preventing sexual violence from occurring and from recurring. In Iraq, in response to the invasion of ISIL, the myriad forms of gender-based violence that have been inflicted upon women and the ensuing displacement crisis, we're seeing that grassroots women are organizing to implement multi-layered prevention strategies in their communities to combat rape as a weapon of war, offering immediate protection while dismantling structural drivers of sexual violence. They've mobilized to create or expand shelters and safe houses where women and girls are protected. They've established escape routes maintained by networks of women human rights defenders, providing an essential conduit for survivors and women at risk who are escaping sexual slavery in ISIS-controlled territories, but also in territories controlled by the government in which they're seeing increasing sectarian violence. This protective infrastructure not only increases refuge for survivors, but it also serves as a preventive measure against future violations. However, despite the overwhelming need, the Iraq central government does not authorize local NGOs to run shelter. The problem lies within policy ambiguity that leaves it unclear whether or not it is within the purview of Iraqi NGOs to provide shelter. While the Kurdistan regional government corrected this ambiguity through a regional policy decree in 2014, the central government of Iraq has yet to act. The right to shelter exists under Iraqi law. The Combating Trafficking in Persons Law of 2012 states that the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs should create shelters to assist survivors of human trafficking and exploitation. Regrettably, the government has interpreted this policy to mean that only the government can run shelters. However, as reported by the government itself last year, government-run shelters remain vacant. Without policy protections, the shelters run by grassroots women's organizations are left vulnerable to police and militia raids, and women housed at the shelters are put at further risk of violence and even death. To meet immediate needs of those most vulnerable and confront this full range of threats, a coalition of local Iraqi women's organizations and their international allies, including Madre, are advocating for both national and international stakeholders for the Iraqi government to issue a directive clarifying that Iraqi NGOs may provide shelter to survivors and those at risk of conflict-related violence. Grassroots women's organizations recognize that amending the shelter policy in this moment of flux would not only help to prevent and protect against conflict-related sexual violence, but could further broaden the safety net for women fleeing all forms of violence. The immediate needs generated by the current crisis create the opportunity to push for longer-term policy changes that address pre-existing threats embedded in Iraq's discriminatory laws and social norms, which structure survivors' vulnerability and undermine their capacity to recover. I'd like to also discuss grassroots women's strategies for promoting women's participation in political processes. There's been a lot of discussion today about the need to implement resolutions, laws, and plans that already exist to support women's rights. As Kanem mentioned, in 2014, as a result of groundbreaking initiatives of women's rights organizations in Iraq and networks across Iraq and Kurdistan, Iraq became the first country in the Middle East to adopt a national action plan for the implementation of Resolution 1325. The National Action Plan provides a blueprint that the Iraqi government, multilateral institutions, and civil society can use to promote women's meaningful participation and leadership in political and decision-making processes. And it would especially bolster women's participation in ongoing gender-sensitive reconstruction and stabilization efforts in Iraq. However, as yet, the plan has not been funded, and significant elements of the overall plan were gutted at the time of its adoption, including sections on necessary legislative changes for the advancement of women's rights and budgeting for the plan's full implementation. Without the allocated budget approval, and importantly, without the political will, implementing the National Action Plan remains a serious challenge. For this reason, over the past 2 years since the adoption of the NAP, Iraqi women's organizations and international partners, including Madre, have been advocating to urge the Ministry of Finance to allocate funds in its annual budget to the implementation of the plan. It remains critical to continue to put pressure on the government of Iraq to come through on its commitments to the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, and to call for the full implementation of Iraq's original National Action Plan and ensure that adequate funding is allocated to make implementation a reality. Finally, I'd like to touch on accountability of crimes at the national and international level. As we know, documentation of gender-based crimes is paramount for bringing justice and accountability to perpetrators. Current documentation and prosecution efforts focus primarily on cases of sexual violence. These efforts hold great significance in ensuring survivors access to reparation and accountability for the crimes committed against them. However, what cannot be missed are women being executed and violated for being human rights defenders, for taking on active public roles as lawyers, doctors, journalists, politicians, and for refusing to conform to traditional gender roles and the extremist doctrine of ISIL and other extremist elements within societies in the MENA region. Their deaths and the violations committed against them need to be captured in such a way that acknowledges the injustice that has been done to them. Similarly, ISIL has executed individuals on the basis of their real or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity. These crimes, too, must be punished, which requires that we document them now. History teaches us that if cases of human rights violations within the context of conflict are not exposed, they are excluded both from current policy reforms and future transitional justice processes. For these reasons, Madre has been working closely with our local partners in Iraq and in Syria to document broader swaths of crimes, to enable victims and survivors to obtain justice in future tribunals and transitional justice mechanisms, to ensure that survivors and families of victims receive adequate redress, and to send the message that the international community will not tolerate these crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra, for your extraordinary work and the presentation of that work. While I pass the floor to Michael, I would like to invite the other participants to think about a specific question I will then ask them. We have Marianne Bauer here. She is the direct link into the office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations for crimes for sexual violence in conflict. And she could be our pipeline straight into the heart of UN power. So the others should think about the 2 or 3 specific recommendations they would want to give Marianne to take back into her suitcase directly to New York. But this is the silent brainwork that goes on. I see that we have friends in the audience who want to come in on that point. But I will be glad first to listen to the practical contribution and general approach that Justice Rapid Response can provide in that context. Michael Bimler, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I want to start by saying that it's a great privilege to be here. We've heard so many really moving testimonials this morning and earlier this afternoon, and especially for someone like me who is, coming as a man from what is called International Geneva. I'm always really impressed by all the powerful and courageous women and men who are fighting against sexual violence every day. And I think we should really pay tribute to them. I'm going to focus in my brief intervention on 2 things. One is accountability for sexual and gender-based violence. And as Cassandra has just reminded us, there is also gender-based violence, which is not only of a directly sexual nature, which we need to take into account. And secondly, I want to speak about the role of humanitarian organizations in this. So to start with accountability, I want to strike a relatively optimistic chord first by saying that we've actually, in the last couple of years, come quite some way in addressing accountability for conflict-related sexual violence. I mean, if you look back at, for example, even 2010, you might have had this sexual violence angle present in some investigations, but it was not necessarily a standard thing at all. It was actually way too often ignored and neglected. And today, I think we can say that an investigation which does not cover a sexual and gender-based violence angle is no longer perceived to be credible by the international community. It won't be accepted as credible anymore. And this, I think, is something which we should really acknowledge. And we have had a couple of examples already today. We've heard about Guatemala earlier this year, these landmark cases which have been brought to trial. Just this Monday, in Senegal, Hissène Habré, the former dictator of Chad, has been convicted also on sexual violence grounds by the Extraordinary African Chambers. There are many other cases currently proceeding around the world. And it's not only in criminal proceedings. If you look at UN commissions of inquiry, for example, since 2012, UN Women has been mandated by the Secretary General to provide a gender advisor and SGBV investigator for every commission of inquiry and every fact-finding mission which is under the UN's banner, and that's a very significant step forward. Also, if you look at regional organizations, the African Union has had its first commission of inquiry on South Sudan a couple of years ago, and it also had a very strong sexual and gender-based violence element, and it had some very strong reporting on sexual and gender-based violence, not just in one chapter tucked away at, as Annex 3 of the report, but actually mainstreamed through the report as it should be. And there are a couple of reasons for this development. I think the first reason is that there has been so much continuous advocacy to ensure that sexual violence in conflict situations is not neglected in investigations of any type. And this has come from many sides. It's come from NGOs, from civil society, from grassroots organizations represented here, but also from the UN, from the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict, from UN Women, from other UN agencies. And this has been enormous advocacy work, which has brought us to where we are now. And secondly, there is this growing awareness that if we lack a gender focus, if we don't get investigations of conflict-related sexual violence right, then we just only see half of the picture. A lot of survivors will not feel that justice is being done to them, and that will be a significant gap in any investigation. Now, what do I mean when I say getting the investigation of conflict-related sexual violence right? What I mean is that we cannot send whoever, whenever, to investigate conflict-related sexual violence on the side, while they're maybe also investigating other crimes, and then think that this is enough. We have to make sure that we send the right expert, that is, someone who has the specific training and experience needed to understand the sensitivities inherent in interviewing and working with sexual violence survivors. It also means that you have to send an expert from the right place, someone who understands the language, someone who understands the culture, someone who understands the context in which they're working and in which this has happened. Or at the very least, if that's not possible, you have to send a qualified and trained interpreter with them who can be a cultural intermediary and who also understands these sensitivities. And
they have to be women.
And they should be women, indeed. And thirdly, yes, I agree.
Sorry.
I agree, but...
In this case, you don't make women speak unless they can speak to another woman.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. But also, there is also sexual violence against men and boys, and there you may want to send male investigators. So you have to make sure you send the right investigator for the situation. And certainly, you need to make sure that you send them at the right time, because there might be a very short window of opportunity in conflict situations. Maybe there's a temporary ceasefire where actually someone can go and do these investigations. And there's been a lot of thinking going on about, how to make this happen, how to get these investigations right. And one of the developments is that now, for the first time, there is a trained cadre of professionals who exists who have the specific background necessary to do these investigations and to protect the survivors. And that's a joint expert roster, which has been set up by UN Women and by Justice Rapid Response in 2012. It now includes more than 170 professionals who are specifically trained on sexual and gender-based violence, who have been certified and who can be made available rapidly within a couple of days to the international community around the globe. And when I say professionals, these are not just criminal investigators, they're legal advisors, they're forensic experts, they're psychosocial experts, they're witness protection experts, they're translators and interpreters. And what I think is very important is that it's an internationally diverse roster. There are 50% of the experts who come from the global south, and because we're talking about the MENA region now, many of them are from either the MENA region or they have very significant work experience there and speak Arabic, and it can be made available as a roster to the international community, to states and international organizations who can make use of it. And experts have been deployed with many different mechanisms. I will just mention, for example, the commissions of inquiry on Syria, the fact-finding mission on Iraq, different mechanisms with Libya over the last years. And their findings, their substantified and significant findings on CRSV have been widely reported, and they've been brought to the attention of the Human Rights Council, the Security Council, and the global public. And we see constantly from our outreach, our discussions, our consultation missions in the MENA region that there is continuous interest in such specialized expertise, and we continue to get a high number of requests for assistance. And, I guess my first message is that we really believe that getting the investigation right is the fundamental step to ensuring accountability for conflict-related sexual violence and contribute to actually deterring future offenders. Let me now briefly turn to my second point, which is the role of humanitarian organizations, and especially also civil society organizations and grassroots organizations. I mean, if you look at a context like Syria or Iraq, it is actually typically humanitarian organizations inside the country or across the border who are the first ones to meet with and really speak with survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. And survivors are also sometimes more likely to confide in humanitarian organizations than in something that looks like an official investigation. I mean, think about it. If someone, and as I said, it can be a she or a he, has been subjected to sexual violence and manages to escape, they probably won't tell this story to the person who smuggles them across the border or checkpoints, and they probably won't tell it to the first police officer or border guard who kind of starts interviewing them or questioning them. But if they meet someone who actually sits down with them and gives them food, gives them shelter, gives them medical care, and at some point asks them why they have all these bruises on their arm, that might be the moment when they start opening up and telling what has happened to them. And this someone is very likely to be someone from a humanitarian organization. So it's absolutely crucial that humanitarian organizations know how to deal with sexual violence survivors who come to them and what to do with the information which they share. And this is not a question, and I want to be very clear on that. It's not a question of turning humanitarians into investigators. That's not their role, that's not what they should do, and these are separate things. Humanitarian protection and investigations are separate. But as a humanitarian worker, and we've spoken to a lot of humanitarian organizations, they told us that there are two things which they would like to know, two skills. Firstly, how they can identify, collect, and preserve information that could form evidence of conflict-related sexual violence, and what they can then do with it. And secondly, when information is shared with them, what measures there are which they can take to reduce the risk of reprisals, of ostracization, of re-traumatization, of re-victimization of the survivors. And there are a lot of small and large organizations in the MENA region who are these frontline responders for conflict-related sexual violence, and they do incredible work in protecting and supporting survivors. But they have not usually been trained in how to deal with conflict-related sexual violence in a way that ensures that important evidence could reach accountability channels while no further harm is done to the survivors. And we at Justice Rapid Response have just last year started a mentoring program to engage with such humanitarian providers in the MENA region, and we would like to expand it to other regions in the world as well, to ensure that they can acquire these skills. And the way we do is that we send some of our most senior experts on conflict-related sexual violence to meet with these organizations and discuss with them and establish a tailored peer-to-peer mentoring program for them. Because as we've heard multiple times during the day, including in the last panel, what we should do is give grassroots organizations the tools that they want and that they say they need. There is no point in bringing directives from Geneva saying, you should be doing this and this and this, and we'll now teach you how to do it. But we need to listen to them, what they need. And this is what we've been doing. We've conducted 11 missions already with 21 experts under this program. I'll just take one example. In Jordan, for example, we've deployed a psychosocial expert and a forensic expert who worked with a small civil society organization in Amman, an organization that provides medical, psychosocial, child protection, and rehabilitation services for Iraqi and Syrian refugees. And they provided mentoring to this organization's staff on how they can clinically examine and document cases of CRSV, how they can interview survivors in a sensitive way, how they can provide trauma counseling, but also how, if the survivors give consent, such information can be referred to accountability mechanisms. And there are other examples. I won't go into detail. In the Iraq context, we've worked with humanitarian responders who work with children specifically, because they're very important skills which you need if you work with children, child-sensitive interviewing, protecting children, working with traumatized children. And I guess the last thing which I want to say about this is that we've very consciously chosen a long-term mentoring approach because we believe, and this is also what has transpired from all the discussions and all the consultations we've had with organizations, that this is more useful and more sustainable than if we do these one-off training sessions where you get everyone into a classroom for one day and then the experts disappear again. So we want to work with them over the long term, go there, meet them when they need it, work with them, then leave them to do their work again, but be available for further advice. And this is quite a new field for us to work as Justice Rapid Response. We've been traditionally far more focused on the judicial and human rights investigation side, but we're absolutely convinced that we need a holistic approach which involves humanitarian organizations in a context like Syria and Iraq, where there are not yet many accountability mechanisms, and where grassroots organizations are carrying a high share of the burden of dealing with conflict-related sexual violence. We believe that mentoring humanitarian responders in this way contributes both to the immediate protection of sexual violence survivors, as well as an increased likelihood of long-term credible accountability. And we believe that both of these are crucial. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael Bimler, another one of the bridge builders in the multi-layer, multi-dimensional, holistic, as you called it, approach to deal with what is really a very complex issue. I would like to come back to my announcement. You have 2 shots at Marianne Bauer, who has sharpened her pencil, who has opened her notebook, and who's going to listen to the 2 suggestions, first from the panel and then from the audience. Is there somebody who's ready with a microphone to run from one corner to the other in the audience? I don't see that from here. Yes, there seems to be a microphone. Ulrike Lunacek, your first 2 recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Well, I also did one before talking about this meta level of dignity and of human dignity, female dignity. I have 2 or 3 things I'd like to address. One is talking about language. We now had the issue when Michael talked about the experts, yeah, that are needed in order to address the issue with women. You know, as I said, I'm an interpreter myself originally, and I remember when interpreting from English to either German or Spanish, always the question is this expert a man or a woman? Because what generally comes up in our minds is men. So that is one request also to the UN level, but also to all kinds of governments. Make sure who you're talking about. And then if you talk about female experts, then name them. Yeah? Because it's important for women to be named, because then otherwise in language we tend to see the men in many positions, even like teachers or others. So that is one point also at this different level. The other thing is, make sure that, and that's to the UN, but it is also to now what I refer to mostly EU member states, also to my own Austria, but others, make sure that the empowerment of women, that is one of the, I would even say is the main focus of international activities and also of development cooperation. And that should include issues of making peace building and conflict prevention a central part of not just development cooperation, but also international affairs and security issues. Because without that, and without changing the participation of women at all levels of security and international affairs, and of making the empowerment of women, girls and women, a central point, things will not change as they should. So that is that, and also include sexual and reproductive health and rights, because it is a very contested issue when it comes to issues of contraceptives, of women deciding themselves how many children, or with their partners, or without them, or whether and how many children they want, or whether they want to have children at all, whether they want to get married, whether they need to have an abortion or not. These kind of things, and that's part of, some is part of UN documents, like the Cairo document and others, that needs to be part of that, and of course more money has to go into, and that's more addressed to EU member states and other member states of the European Union, of the UN, sorry, the UN. Yeah.
Ulrike Lunacek, there will be unanimous support for all your points, but in particular better funding. Kaula, would you like to come in with your most urgent, most practical recommendations to the Office of the United Nations Special Representative on the issue?
Well, we had the chance to meet her in Damascus last year, and actually we were able we managed to make her meet with actual survivors and hear some live testimonies. Actually, what I heard from you was enough. Our urgent need is like more fund with more resiliency to be able to reach more areas. This is our major obstacle. As I said several times, we needed to restart from scratch. Training programs for service providers is very crucial, very important. That should be like as related to the culture and the dynamic of the culture, because we tackle very sensitive issues. Being able to expand with more services, that's another thing we need to talk about.
Thank you so much, Kaula. Michael?
Thank you very much. I think the first thing which I would say is that we should make sure that interventions or investigations or any programming we do should be context specific. So we talk a lot about the MENA region, and that's a region which, however you define it, it can stretch from Morocco or Mauritania to Iran or even Afghanistan. It's a huge region, so we need to make sure that we look at the local context and don't think that there is any kind of one-size-fits-all approach, and we need to make sure that, you know, as much as we want to learn lessons from different situations, we are keeping in mind the context. And the second point I would make is, and I've mentioned that before a bit, is about mainstreaming. I think what I would like to see and what I really liked in this South Sudan Commission of Inquiry report is that gender considerations should be throughout the report and not just in one single specific place. You shouldn't have a report of 100 pages and then you say, oh, in one chapter we're going to look at how this affects women. Yes. Women are usually 50% of the population or more of a place. So you can't just say, okay, we're going to talk generally for 70 pages and then we'll do 10 pages on violence against women, and aren't we great because we've done a gender aspect. So these are my 2 points. Thank you.
Cassandra, this is yours.
Okay. I think I'd like to repeat the recommendation I've already spoken about, which is to impel the government of Iraq to legalize sheltering by NGOs. And I'd like to add to that in all contexts, we should be promoting programming and providing funding to support programs to combat the stigma associated with sexual violence. And I mean that through various ways, including public education activities, radio programming, creating safe spaces for people to come and talk about issues of peace and tolerance and respect for human rights. But beyond that, also supporting direct service programming that addresses stigma, including psychosocial support, empowerment activities, vocational trainings, and making sure that they're provided comprehensively in one place for people.
Thank you so much. I now turn to the audience. I have seen 3 hands up. There are more to come. Number 1 is the lady in the second row. I'm sorry for not addressing you nominally, but I hardly see you. Then we have on the left-hand side from me in the first row. Then we have the gentleman in the second row on the other side. Please go ahead. Can you tell us, remind us your name?
Maria Labdi from Women Now for Development and Syrian grassroots organizations. So my question to Mariana, or my recommendations, or I don't know, we have also met the special envoyé when she visited Turkey and Lebanon, and Sabah were there, and also Ibrahim were there. And we told her a lot of story of survivals, and nothing were mentioned in any statement after. She were just mentioning ISIS crimes, and we sent her a letter after, signed by more than 400 Syrian women rights activists and organizations, saying you are doing more harm to Syrian women when you are not mentioning all part and all perpetrators. So it is one thing that you have to understand, that when we are asking for accountability, we have to ask accountability for all parts. And we understand what's happening in our country, and one answer I get that you don't understand the danger of ISIS. We understand that we are the first victims of Daesh and other groups. So how we can make the office accountability vis-a-vis that grassroots organizations. And the second point, yeah, you mentioned it. It's say when you are talking about the first pillar about mobilizing Syrian government in commitment in women protections, how we can engage a perpetrator of systematic war crime, and I'm using word of Amnesty International to commit in protection of women. That makes no sense for us. Thank you.
Now the lady in the first row, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Christina Stummer and I'm the gender advisor of the Austrian Development Agency. First of all, I would like to thank for the really specific and additional perspectives which have been brought in by the panelists in addition to the discussions we had before. And then I would like to come back to the engagement of men, which has been brought up various times by Marina Marinaki, by you, Ulrike Lunacek, and the ambassador. And I would be interested, we have said it's important, but we haven't discussed practical approaches. And I would like to ask the question to UNFPA and also the UN, because we know that there are approaches used by the UN, by NGOs, to really engage men. I think it's necessary to become the whole fight against sexual and gender-based violence sustainable. And I would recommend to include it, but I would be interested in how far you perceive it as relevant and practical in the specific context. Thank you.
I can give you a brief answer on that one. One of my male champions in the UN system is a military man, by the way, who has led a number of delicate UN missions. His name is Chatterjee Lidder, Double D, and he's one of, I've got to know him in a Security Council retreat we organized in Albach, and he keeps sending me information on very specific issues. He's one of my male champions, so to speak, on 1325 implementation. He has a lot of credibility as a military person, as someone who has a large experience in leading UN missions, because that, of course, is a point we haven't specifically mentioned so far, but the Secretary General in his yesterday's speech referred to it. We have to make 100% sure that peacekeepers in the name of the United Nations or any other organizations never ever commit sexual violence, and if ever they do, nobody in this world is not perfect. These things have to be uncovered, they have to be addressed, and there have to be immediate and direct consequences. I would like to mention maybe also in that context, because nobody ever does, another one of my male champions in the implementation of Resolution 1325, and that is the Secretary General of the United Nations himself. I have witnessed with Ban Ki-moon an extraordinary event, and I would like to relate this to you. There is a conference, an annual conference in Munich. It's called the Munich Security Conference. Some of you might have heard about it. It's like the Davos for the security biotop. It's mostly military, it's mostly men. The women there have been organizing a breakfast every once in a while, but that's about as far as we got, unless it's Angela Merkel speaking. So this kind of event has a big dinner on the first night. This is hosted by Bavarian Prime Minister Horst Seehofer, about 2,000 people. Ban Ki-moon was the guest of honor, and it was, of course, as a guest of honor, his choice, the subject he would wish to talk about in front of all these military people from the whole world. What did he pick? What did he talk about? Resolution 1325. I think that was a great sign that on the top level of the United Nations there is an awareness of the importance of the security side, as you have also pointed out,
of what we are discussing here. There might be other answers. We would like to go on now. The gentleman in the second row, please.
Brahim Qasim. Thank you, Maria. You short for my question because I will ask you the same things, but I will ask another. What is the follow-up for this visit to Syria? And another question, my lady, what your information about jihad nikah? Because I had met 4 women who were accused by the regime. They made this lie media. They didn't do anything. After this accused, they were still virgin. I met it there 4 girls who appearance on TV, and they were virgin. They didn't do anything, and it was just a media from the regime. And if you want to have this evidence, I will give you this evidence, and you should read a report with I wrote it with the Euromed rights about these cases. It improved. This is just a lie from the regime and his friends in Lebanon and Tunisia. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution. I would like to remind all participants that this is not the place to settle individual cases. I am terribly sorry for having to say that out straight, because this is, you can talk to each other on the margins, but this is a conference that aims at developing general strategies, at reacting general strategies for linking the grassroots and the global. And this is not the occasion to start dealing with individual cases as much as you might feel the need to do so. I have seen now the lady in the 5th or 6th row. Would you please pass the microphone to her? Here. In the middle. There. She's tall and beautiful. Just speak close to your mouth.
Okay, now it works. Thank you very much. I just wanted to add 2 small points based on what Mrs. Ambassador shared this morning in regards to Boko Haram. I worked there during 2011-2030 for the German ministry as a gender and peace building officer. And I do remember also that we sent many early warnings to many UN organizations operating in Cameroon, Chad, and Nigeria, and this wasn't considered. Therefore, in your strategy, I think one of the first level was we have to be aware of the first early warnings now, but ensure that the early warnings are also considered and that there is a mechanism in place to deal with them. Otherwise, we are more harming than really supporting the process. In all crises we mentioned this morning, Boko Haram, or right now the ongoing, I'm going to use the words now, the ongoing genocide in Burundi, or what's ongoing there are early warnings that are shared by local organizations, by women organizations, by the civil society, and there is nothing done. And please ensure that there are mechanisms in place, there are resources in place to deal effectively with them. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to have them as a strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. We have the Professor Benedict in the 7th row. I've seen you, but I'm sorry, I'm keeping the order of those who have raised their hands. Now, becoming impatient is not going to change anything. Professor Benedict is, if you turn around on the left-hand side, the hand is up there. Your left-hand side hand. What?
Thank you very much. Wolfgang Benedict from University of Graz, Institute of International Law. I am concerned with what Ursula Plasnik was requesting, namely the end of impunity. And I'm asking how that is working in practice. We have more and more cases where jihadists are being sentenced in Europe in the last years, but I never heard about the sentence which was made because of sexual violence in this conflict. Now, when I look at the resolution 1820 of 2008, it says very clearly that these rape and acts of sexual violence constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity, and that there is an obligation for all states to make that punishable. And we have a positive experience when it comes to the fight against torture, that according to the convention, UN Convention Against Torture, torture can be judged around the world. So no torturer can escape the justice. But what about this situation? To what extent is this enforceable? To what extent it is being monitored when it comes to International Criminal Court? To what extent is there a possibility to bring sexual violators from conflicts to this court? Thank you.
Professor Benedek, you are the international legal eagle, and maybe you can send some of your students into the subject matter to investigate and write a thesis on it quickly, because I think you're pointing very much to something that, yeah, it's not only UN. You have pointed to the fact that nation states are also in the obligation to speak up and to indicate and to pressure and to push, and there's little of that, too little for me to talk about. Before I give the floor to you, sir, I will give the floor to Ulrike Lunacek, who wants to say goodbye. We would like to thank her for her participation. We hope that you take a lot of the concrete recommendations and impressions back to the European Parliament and the work you're doing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ursula Plasnik. And yeah, I'm sorry I have to leave because I have another appointment at 5 o'clock here in Graz. It's a different place. But I was very happy to be here, and it has been very relevant also to me to hear from you, even though it was just these 2 hours. But nevertheless, I can assure you, I take many of the things that have been recommended also to the UN level with me to the European Parliament, because also every year there is a delegation and there is a specific part in the Foreign Affairs Committee working at the UN level, also from the Women's Committee, and all these things will also find its place in the European Parliament, especially when then going to the UN General Assembly and when negotiating at the UN level, and also with member states, because that is sort of our own here in the European Union, who also have to be convinced to do more on the issue. So thank you very much, and sorry for having to leave, but it was also very important for me. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Sir, please, the microphone. The gentleman in the second row. No more microphone. Where did it go? Yeah, maybe you just speak up. You have a beautiful voice that carries.
Thank you. I suggest a question, because I heard a lot of time that Security Council, they have solutions. So it needs to change the systems. We need now to build a process for bringing those fighters who's doing that horrible things with women in Iraq and Syria and Somal and Boko Harams. It need to build a new system how we'll bring those to the courts. Because local courts, it doesn't help, as in Iraq and Syria also. So should Security Council think for the plan for the futures? Because those fighters, tomorrow they will be everywhere, then no one they can keep him to become. That's, it mean, we should look to build a justice. And building justice, it's the first things for the reconciliation and also compensation for the woman in the futures also. When there are no justice, there are no peace. Thank you very much.
I have 2 questions. One for Mariam, another is for the Austrian, the organizer of the conference. The one for you, Mariam, is in the conclusion, the Judy, when we concluded our sessions, she asked about she just mentioned it, we don't need the direction, we need the tools. Now we are just raising and presenting the problem just to put the problems and the needs on the table. And we need support and tool to continue our work we started. The other thing is about what the Australian government have for us if this conference, that's all, it's finished, or they continue to support the NGO, especially local NGO, because the problem was the international level and UN agency and even international NGO is just supporting international NGO, after that going to the local. Most of the money is going for the salaries and rating the house, not for the grassroots people and not for the women NGO. That means we need capacity building, we need support from your side to continue what we started already. Thank you.
I do, of course, understand the wish of those who are grassroots activists to come back to their communities with more than good words and intentions. I'm afraid I have to disappoint you, let me be blunt. I think it was extraordinarily difficult to organize this meeting. It is not evident, and it is not because all of us or most of us come from what you would consider rich countries, that it is easy to raise awareness for a difficult subject, easy to raise understanding and to connect to international activity. So I have to be totally blunt on that, if I understood your question right. But I would want, before trying to make a brief, not summary, but possibly comment from my experience and from my side, give the floor to, hand the microphone to Marianne, whether she would want to comment on the voices she has heard and the impression she takes with her. If you want that, it's fine. If not, you can also refuse it.
Thank you very much. I've heard all of you, and I've been many different important points that you've raised, and I've taken good note of them, and I can guarantee you that I will bring all of them back to New York. So thank you very much. Just to respond maybe to the last point that was made, we will bring that strategy to the region. It's important that we don't just develop that in New York, but as the next step, we are planning to hold a regional workshop. I don't want to name the country yet, but we are working on that, so that as a next step we can really develop a concrete implementation plan. And when I say we, I don't mean our office, but we facilitate it for the other organizations on the grounds to say, what can we do under this and that pillar? How can we regionally cooperate on that, or also on the country basis, what needs to be done? And then when we have that concrete action plan, we can also look into how we can support you in fundraising for these activities. So it is more of a long-term vision, and it doesn't end with these 7 pillars. That's just that is the shared vision that we have came up with in consultations with you during the visit in the last year, and with UN organizations in New York, and also some civil society organizations, but we want to bring it to the region and really speak and hear from the UN and civil society organizations on the ground how they think they need to implement this, their vision basically, and just we will help them in hopefully finding resources for that important work. The other point that I wanted to make is what Ambassador Plasnik said about why it is so attractive for perpetrators. It means we need to make it less attractive for them. We need to be able to cut the funding streams to these terrorist organizations. We need to be able to cut the trafficking routes. And one way that we have in doing that is, and I'm just looking for my notes. We're trying to work with the sanctions regimes, and we have created that link that financing terrorist organizations through sexual violence activities, through trafficking of women, is considered as supporting terrorist organizations, which is a listable criteria under the Al Qaeda and ISIL sanctions regime. So we are trying to create this link to serve as a deterrence and actually as also as an accountability mechanism, and at the same time. We are working also closely with JRR on finding experts for the panel of experts that provide information to the sanctions regime, and we really draw heavily on their trained gender experts. And I've just for example, not in the MENA region, but on the DRC sanctions regime, where we also have that problem. Just yesterday, I sent 4 of their experts as profiles to our colleagues, and they are interested in interviewing them because they really have excellent trained experts that the UN can profit from. So I think this link to the sanctions regime is critical in making it less attractive for perpetrators of sexual violence. Also, yes, working with men is really important, and particularly also to send messages to their peers. And as I said earlier, we work with religious leaders to develop a counter-narrative and to dispel that myth that sexual violence is valid on a religious basis. Also, we've worked, for example, with General Kamert to send messages to militaries, and because he speaks, the military talk. So we're working with very strategic male individuum to also, amplify the messages that we need to send. There were so many other points that I think, I will, if you feel I didn't answer them here, please don't hesitate to contact me offline. I'd be happy to talk to you, and thank you very much for.
Thank you. There will be a coffee break afterwards because we are reversing the order of business. I do that with the explicit approval of the organizing team. We will continue with a quick point from Cassandra and or not Michael, please.
Just to urge that the consultations that the SRSG's office plans to do in the region, that they really reach and capture the perspectives of the grassroots level of society, and that they not be guided by pre-existing connections between NGOs and UN agencies or government NGOs who really are not representative of so much of the population, and that they really, encapsulate the true grassroots perspective.
Thank you so much. Does this microphone work now, or shall I take the other one? Yeah. Not so good. Turn it off. Huh? Does it work? Can you hear me? I'm realizing that this is a late moment in the day. Everybody is craving for a strong espresso. I thank Jody Williams for being with us for concluding remarks. Rigoberta is also back. Thank you so much, and please convey our thanks to Leima. It has been an extraordinary experience meeting here, trying to connect the grassroots and the United Nations global level. It has been a first of its kind experience following the presentation yesterday in the Security Council of the new strategy how to combat conflict-related sexual violence. And I would like to really express our common thanks to those who have been organizing the conference, who have been persistent and resilient enough to address a complex and extremely urgent but also extremely difficult subject. Thank you to the Austrian Foreign Ministry, to the people who've been organizing and coaching us through this experience. Thank you so much. Rather than making a summary, let me quote what the Secretary General of the United Nations said in his yesterday intervention before the Security Council. And I'm quoting, "Sexual violence is widely recognized as a deliberate strategy used to shred the fabric of society, to control and intimidate communities, and to force people from their homes. It is rightly seen as a threat to international peace and security, a serious violation of international humanitarian and human rights law, and a major impediment to post-conflict reconciliation and economic development." That, in short, encapsulates the complexity of the issue. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon also announced that the 19th of June, ladies and gentlemen, put that into your agenda, the 19th of June is from now on going to be the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict. This is one further step to create large-scale public awareness. We do have the 29th of November as the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women that we are aware of, but there will be now the 19th of June as a new landmark date to concentrate our work in the field of changing mindsets and creating public
awareness. Ban Ki-moon has also pointed out that sexual violence has now become an issue as a tactic of terrorism. And I wonder, as a legally trained person, whether this does have specific legal consequences, whether the definition of conflict-related sexual violence is still pertinent or not. We leave this with the legal eagles to discuss. Ban Ki-moon has also pointed to the fact that sexual violence as a tactic of terrorism has become a line of business, a very cynical, cruel line of business, and he has mentioned in his yesterday's statement to the Security Council, it is estimated, and I'm quoting, that the Yazidi community gave Daesh up to $45 million in ransom payments in 2014 alone, end of quote. So this shows the magnitude of the issue we are faced with also on the economic, but let's not say economic, but business side. I would like to remind all of us the basic principles, the 3 Ps of Resolution 1325, which is prevention, protection, and participation. And this applies to this subject as much as to other issues that are of crucial importance for women. Linking the grassroots and the treetops, ladies and gentlemen, is a bit like a connectivity conference. Everybody talks about connectivity these days, and we do it in a technical or information technology term. We should also remind each other that to address a complex problem like this one and an urgent one, we need to connect the efforts that have been pointed out by the various speakers in today's conference. This conference was rich in experience and also rich in suggestions of how to better deal with this subject matter. Learn to listen. This is really one of the appeals we have to repeat. Learn to listen to the voices of women. Learn to listen to early warning. I share the frustration that was expressed by one of our colleagues that so often the warning signals given by women and the degrading situation of women in a particular country are not taken as seriously as they have to be taken. And this, in my opinion, is a broader experience that women across the world share. The broad experience of not being taken seriously, ladies and gentlemen. It's about time we change our mindset and we make it clear to men and women alike that what we talk about has to be taken seriously by all and from all sides. Questions of dignity came up. Dignity, the help to restore dignity and change women and men from victims to reconciliation partners. From survival to reconciliation. It sounds easy. It's a long and thornful path that has to be supported by so many partners that can share their experience. Access. Access is one of the magic words, and it has come up in many different contexts today. Access for women, because many things, many networks exist. It's only the women who have little, no, or bad access to information, to media, to make their voices heard, to learn about their rights, to health care, to health systems and services that are being provided, to security, the most basic of rights and requests, to the legal system where it exists, or at least to transitional forms of justice as they might be established or built in various contexts. And I'm very much agreeing also with the suggestion made this afternoon. We should be specific in our help, specific in the context of each society. Now, one point that is maybe a difficult point, but it should be addressed. I'm saying this as an Austrian former foreign minister and an Austrian ambassador. What does it have to do with Austria? Apart from the fact that the Austrian Foreign Ministry has always been among those who put human rights and with this women's rights on the top of their international agenda. Is this something that happens far away? Is this something that happens in the MENA region and it stops in front of the border of Austria? Ladies and gentlemen, of course not. We are part and parcel of what is happening. We are part and parcel. Why? Because sexual violence in times of conflict as tactics of terrorism are among the major reasons for people, both men and women and children, leaving the country they normally live in and becoming refugees. This is one of the most serious and most numerous reasons for people to leave their countries and to seek shelter in other parts of the world. It also is, so we should take this into consideration when we discuss the subjects of how to advance in peace building, as difficult as it may seem at that very stage, both with regard to Syria, but also with regard to Iraq and the wider region. It concerns us in our it concerns us directly. I'm not only talking about Austria, but about other countries, as far as it is part of asylum procedures and the Geneva Convention application. It concerns us because we have to deal with the immediate consequences and with the long-term integration effort that is implied in women and men leaving their countries for that very specific reason. We have also learned during the day how important it is not to look at a specific section, at a specific moment in time, but to see the larger picture, to see the longer term perspective, and to not shy away from longer term efforts to bring help and organize support for the women and men who are victims of conflict or terrorism-related sexual violence. We need to build bridges, and they have to be bridges that hold, that are resilient, and that reach into the future. The Austrian Foreign Ministry will now, on the basis of the discussions you have heard and the interventions that have been made, produce what I would call 7 pillars plus document. The 7 pillars, I'm looking towards Ursula Werter-Pitsch for that, and Jürgen Heissel, who is somewhere in the shade. And their team, they will now have the task to produce a paper. They will share it with you. They will share it with Marianne Bauer, so she can go back with heavily loaded bags on her plane to New York. For that purpose, I would be extremely grateful in the name of the organizers if you could, of those of you who have not yet sent in their presentation papers or the written statements they have produced, I would be very grateful if you could send them to the organizers. This will help to feed in to the 7 pillars that have been established in yesterday's strategy by Zainab Hava Bangura. Thank you once more for your participation. Thank you for your substantive interest and proposals. This is an expert conference, but it's more than that. It's a sign that we care for each other and that we're not indifferent in the face of these atrocities. Thank you so much.